we were very, very keen to understand what would happen. Because there were two matters that were of significance for us in terms of the independence of Zimbabwe. One of them was that Zimbabwe had a relatively large white minority population. And therefore, we're very keen to see how the comrades are going to handle this particular matter. And you remember what happened. The leadership under President Mugabe as Prime Minister then took a very clear position, which was that we fought against colonialism, white minority domination, and so on, not against white people. And let's handle ourselves in a manner which will result in that national reconciliation. And I think you can see what happened with us here in 1994. That we followed exactly on the footsteps that had been followed by the leadership of Zimbabwe under President Mugabe. So where Zimbabwe had in 1980 a General Walls to lead the Zimbabwe Defense Force. And some people were not sensitive to the extraordinary imagination and courage it would take to take Zimbabwe through that transition. People didn't understand. Why are they allowing Smith's general to lead the Zimbabwe Defense Force? But that's what we did here. We're following the example of Zimbabwe and said, in our case, we must follow this example that had been set. So their General Walls was our General Meiring. Chief of the CIO was Ken Flower, inherited from the Smith regime, Central Intelligence Organization. Here where the Chief of Police was Johan van der Merwe. I'm saying that period of transition, which was handled by President Mugabe and the rest of the leadership, ZANU-PF, there was a very important lesson for us in terms of how we might want to handle our own situation. Again, we must indeed pay tribute to the leadership of President Mugabe and the other comrades for what they did in order to assist us here to resolve what is an important challenge in terms of ensuring that we had a smooth transition, as smooth as possible, a transition to a post-apartheid democratic rule. Oliver Tambo attended the ceremony to lower the British flag and raise the Zimbabwe flag in 1980, April. And the very same day, day one of the independence of Zimbabwe, he met with Prime Minister Mugabe and said to him, now Zimbabwe is independent. Let's go back to the question that you raised in 1978. The need for Zimbabwe to help to support our struggle in South Africa. So President Mugabe said, Prime Minister Mugabe said to him, look, if you ask for permission from me that the ANC must operate from Zimbabwe, I will say wait. Because you can see, we are carrying so many of Smith's people, like the ones I've mentioned, many others. Give us time, those people will disappear, and then it becomes more easier for you to operate from Zimbabwe. He said, if you ask me, that's the response I'll give you. But rather than asking me, he says, why don't you send some of your people to Zimbabwe now to make an assessment, for the ANC to make an assessment for itself as to whether it can operate. So you don't have to depend on Robert Mugabe. So OR came back to Lusaka and reported this, and we said, very good idea. And indeed, we went to Zimbabwe. I was in that delegation, which went to Zimbabwe to assess the situation to see whether we can operate. Yeah. So that was in the very first month of the independence of Zimbabwe. So we stayed in Zimbabwe for 2 weeks or so, wandered around, talked to people, went back to Lusaka and said, of course we can always operate in Zimbabwe. Some operations would have to be underground. Some of them would have to be open above ground. But of course we can. So fine. So OR then asked, we had to go back to talk to Prime Minister Mugabe about that. And I went with him. Now, comrades, I'm talking about April, May 1980. This is a new, young Zimbabwe. Across the border, the Limpopo, you have an apartheid regime which is intensely hostile to this government that's taken over in Zimbabwe. And obviously very intensely hostile, similarly to the ANC. But we're saying, despite that, what can be done? So we came back and met with President Mugabe, Prime Minister. As it happens, he was accompanied by the current president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who was at the time Minister of National Security. And so OR says to Prime Minister Mugabe, we can operate. So Prime Minister Mugabe says, well, okay, if that's your decision, fine. Now, why don't we arrange that Thabo here and Emmerson must sit together and work out how you are going to operate. Now, comrades, I'm saying all of these things. I don't think they've been said before. We worked out a system of cooperation, which meant Zimbabwe Defense Force actually moved a battalion of the army to the banks of the Limpopo. The reason for that was that we could then bring in weapons from Zambia into Zimbabwe, which the Zimbabwe army would pick up at the border, take them through Zimbabwe to that battalion, so that our people would then come into Zimbabwe carrying no weapons. Instead, the Zimbabwe government would issue them with false identity cards. There were a lot of roadblocks at that time. So as they go through as Zimbabweans and collect their weapons on the banks of the Limpopo. I'm saying this is April, May 1980. There were other decisions that were taken, like the Zimbabwe government would issue us with passports which identify some of us as Zimbabwean, in order to facilitate movement in the context of any matter that would be sensitive. So instead of me traveling as Thabo Mbeki to some secret meeting somewhere in the world, I would travel as Patrick João to